So my name's Geraldine Blake. I'm the Director of Collaboration at London Funders. London Funders is a membership network for funders in London. Hurrah, hurrah! Welcome, Grace. I'd like to introduce you to my co-presenter, Grace, who also works at London Funders, and whose job title is Projects Operations and Data Manager. Grace, are you able to share the slides?
Yes. Lovely.
Fantastic. I can. They're very small. Is there a way? I wonder if there's a way of making those bigger. Ah, perfect. Right. So back to London Funders. We've got about 170 members, all investors in London civil society. So the really interesting thing about London Funders is it's cross-sector. So we have independent foundations, we have public funders, the GLA, London councils, all the local councils. We have some corporate funders, and you know, a range of, you know, everyone from the big nationals to the tiny locals. And our role is all about supporting collaboration. We bring funders together, we help them to connect with each other and cooperate, and all of this is about you know, for the benefit of Londoners. And we have we've got some data about our members. You know, we know who our members are, we know kind of what they spend and where they spend it and that kind of thing and what they're interested in, but that was about the extent of our engagement with data previously to the London community response. So we have been on a huge learning journey, and we wanted to share that journey with you, what we've done, what we've learnt, and what that means going forward. So we're going to talk about something called the London Community Response. This was a collaborative funder response to the pandemic, lockdown, the issues for the community sector, and what we wanted. So we knew that we needed to do something quickly to get money out fast to community organisations, as fast as possible and as simply as possible. And we had some, we'd done something a bit similar to this in response to the Grenfell Tower fire. So we had some of the kind of processes and tools to do it. And we'd also been thinking about what might happen post-Brexit. So we'd been reviewing those tools anyway. So we were kind of ready to go with this. We brought together a group of funders from across sectors. So people like City Bridge Trust and the GLA, and London Community Foundation and lots of others. And we set up the collaboration in a way where there were all sorts of different ways that funders could get involved. So they could pool funds if they wanted to, they could align funds, they could share intelligence, they could share people, you know, lots of different ways they could engage with this. And then possibly the most important thing we did was we developed a single application form. So community organisations in London didn't have to run around filling in lots of funding applications. They could fill in one single application, and then that went through to a funder portal, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. And then we had, we've done 5 waves of funding over the last year. So started off with some crisis grants back in March last year, and have just finished a round of recovery grants. So in terms of the numbers so far, this was a big, we think probably the biggest collaboration certainly that we know of, 67 funders, over 10,000 applications received, and over 57.5 million was given out. And over 3/4 of those grants in the last 3 waves, waves 3, 4 and 5, went to the organisations led by and for the communities who were most impacted by COVID-19. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the process. Now, you're probably not going to be able to see those slides unless your glasses are a lot better than mine. So let me see if I can, I'll talk you around them. So we're going to start at the top. So I think the point is this is an iterative process. This cycle keeps going round. So the first thing you do is you secure some commitment from funders that they're going to put some money in. And then what we do is a round of intelligence gathering. So the London Community Response had to start with 10 themes throughout the funding would go out through. So this was things like children and young people, arts and culture, refugees and migrants, advice, you know, the key themes that funders are interested in and that community organisations are operating under. So we would have a cycle of intelligence calls for each of those themes. So we would bring together funders and say, what do you know? What do you know about what's changing? Where's the evidence? And then all of the intelligence that we gather together, we then published on our website in a COVID-19 resource hub. So we were making all of that intelligence as public as we possibly could so that anybody could look at it. That intelligence then enabled the collaborating funders to agree the priorities for the round of funding that they were about to launch, and for us to write the guidance for the applicants. As I said, applicants could then fill in a single application form, as simple as possible. You know, it needed to have the information that all of those 67 funders wanted, but we kept it as simple as we possibly could. And then the applications that were eligible, there was a sifting, there was an eligibility checking process, that the organisations, the applications that were eligible, so from an eligible organisation for the, you know, costs that were eligible, went on to a portal, a funder-only portal. And on that portal, funders could then search for the kinds of things they were interested in. So you could search by geography, you could search by theme, you could search by whether or not a group was led by. So if you were interested, for example, if you're a funder who is interested in funding applications, if you're interested in funding in the London Borough of Harrow, you have a particular interest in deaf and disabled people, and what you're particularly concerned about at the moment is mental health, then you can use the portal to give you just those applications. So funders were then able to do their own assessment and decision-making process. So they made their own decisions about the grants. They went back onto the portal to log, we have offered a grant to this organisation. So all the other funders could see, no, that one's taken. And then at the end of the process, there would be a reconciliation. So, you know, we have this data about who funded what, where, and does that match with what the funders think they funded? We would then communicate externally, you know, who's been funded, where the money's gone, you know, some of the stories about that. And then there was an evaluation and learning process, both for London funders as the convener of the collaboration, but also, you know, each funder able to run their own monitoring and evaluation as they wished. I'm going to hand over to Grace, who is going to talk more about the actual data.
So Geraldine's mentioned some of these things already, but we had a lot of intelligence that shaped our funder response. So our intelligence insight calls were categorised by themes such as arts and culture or homelessness, and each was chaired by a funder with expertise in that area. And it was gathering intelligence and learning what funders were hearing from their grantees and the communities they served. This then fed into our COVID COVID-19 resource hub as well, a dedicated place on our website for communities, signposting them to areas of guidance and help. From Wave 2 onwards, we started working with equity partners, Ubailey, Inclusion London, Women's Resource Centre and Consortium. They really helped us identify the correct questions to ask, the correct definitions of terms, the thresholds, and help shape priorities and really raise the issues up the agenda as well. And they also helped us with outreach and support, and we would do specific webinars for potential grantees in their networks as well. After Wave 3, we appointed 2 learning partners. We worked with RIOS to look at the process, what organisations were doing and what funders needed to think about, and TSIC to look at the equity-led questions and the issues around equity and funding. They were running workshops, interviewing funders, interviewing grantees, and running surveys that fed back into some interim reports from Wave 3 and some final reports which are due to come out shortly. Everyone that applied for the London Community Response was also invited to fill out a short survey to ask them how they found the experience and the application process. This did help us shape and change things going forward in the waves. Really small things such as making sure everyone got a copy of their application form and having a downloadable Word document for them to draft their application in so they could send to other staff members as well to feed into. The GLA were also sending out a weekly survey to hundreds of communities and organisations, feeding back in real time what their issues and concerns were for themselves as organisations, but also for their service users as well. And then we were looking at the data we'd collected in previous waves. What was that telling us? What did we expect in terms of applicants for each waves? How busy do we think they would be, and the turnaround times to get back to applicants as well? And then through all of this data, we could also feed back to applicants as well. And in the guidance, we could give them kind of a real understanding of what the chances were of getting funded and where the funding had gone before, how much had gone to equity-led groups, how much had gone to grassroots organisations and such. And then we have our data journey, which changed throughout the wave. So in Wave 1, we had some fantastic support from 360 Giving to help us develop a dashboard to track the progress of grants coming in and grants being funded. We produced a summary data report on applications and grants for funders. And in Wave 2, when we started working with the equity partner and asking the equity questions, we could start collecting data on that as well. The fabulous DataKind UK undertook a really detailed analysis for us as well, which helped us make changes for Wave 3. So in Wave 3, we added in the mental health as its own theme because that was coming out really strongly from what DataKind had shown us. We did small things as well, like changing how we collected the data in the back end to make it more easy to work with and easier to analyse. We've published on our website our first data summary report, and that kind of looked at the overview of all the numbers, where the funding had gone, through what themes, where, what locations. And DataKind then again took a further analysis for us. And the learning partner surveys came back as well, which really helped us shape what the priorities were going forward. We also changed the equity questions at this point for more accurate data collection. And we published another data summary report. And in Wave 5, we worked with the equity partners again to redefine the threshold we had. I think from Wave 2, we had it as 50% of organisations to be led by, and that went up to 75% and further improved those questions as well. And DataKind, once again, are doing some fabulous work to help us analyse all of that data. Our data journey has changed as well. So at the beginning, we just had kind of a weekly dashboard for our numbers. We then managed to change this into a newsletter weekly for all the partners. Our 4N email covered the news, needs, numbers and next, so we could be really open with the data that was coming in real time. We held webinars to feedback with funders to inform what had happened in the previous wave and what this might mean for the next wave as well. We published all the grants on our website, along with the data summary report, with the organisations' names, who funded them, how much, and what boroughs they were in. And all our partners committed to publishing on 360 as well under the COVID tag they set up. We also started to publish our success rates in the summary report. So how many applicants applied, how many were eligible, and how many successfully received funding as well, to also guide applicants for future waves. And then I guess we'll come on to our learning and what we've learned throughout this whole process, and the importance of data and what it meant for us to really shape waves going forward. We hadn't really worked with data before, as Geraldine has said, and then we had so much. And it was really key for us as well that it wasn't just about the numbers, it was also looking at the qualitative data and what people were saying in their application forms as well. And that's where DataKind really came in and helped us, because we didn't really have those skills. And that's where we would see emerging topics such as mental health and that becoming its own theme. It was also the real time looking at the numbers. We could predict patterns from previous waves. Once or twice we extended the wave slightly because we could see how many applications were in the systems. And then back to equity, we had some funders that were already quite far along in their journey in equity and doing really good work. We had some partners who were right at the beginning, and it really helped shape their way of thinking and also bring everyone to a level playing field as well. And then data skills. We learned how valuable those skills are in a team, and that you don't have to be a data scientist to work with some data and understand it. It was quite intimidating at the beginning, but we also realised how there's really good support out there as well. We worked with 360, DataKind UK, with Superhighways, and there's help out there if you need it, and it's a good journey to learn from as well. The portal that we were working with was kind of being built as we were going at some points, so it was quite labour intensive at points, so we were learning as we went. But from this, we've also learned that we'll be embedding data into our business as usual going forward, to help with our members networks group and what we're looking at. We're also working with DataKind and some fabulous volunteers to take all this data we've collected over the last year and kind of build a more interactive dashboard on our website so people can look at it themselves, and it will be really open and transparent, and people can see where the money's gone, where the money didn't go, where there are cold spots or hot spots as well. So I think that's everything from us. If you have any questions,
we've got
please
great
put them in
questions.
the Q&A and we are happy to answer them.
We've got some great questions in the Q&A. The first one is about what platforms did we use for sharing amongst the funders? I'm going to have a go at that, Grace, but come in. So we are. I mean, I'll have to say we did this really simply. You know, the sharing the data with funders was done through a weekly e-news. So we didn't have a live dashboard that was connected to the portal that funders could access. Our portal was built in a crisis. It was built for the Grenfell response, and then it was resurrected in a crisis, at the beginning of lockdown. We've the portal and the tools that we use quite openly with other funder collaborations. So a big national advice collaboration, and also match trading, which is for social enterprises. And I know that the match trading portal they've taken what we did and built on it. So actually their portal gives a much kind of gives a live dashboard in a way that ours doesn't yet. So one of the things that we want to do is then go back to those other funder collaborations that we've shared with and learn from them about what we could do for next time. But in terms of platforms for sharing, it's pretty much Excel and email. Grace, is that right?
Yeah, I think we've definitely learned about if we were to build a platform from scratch, we now have a really good understanding of what would be needed and that design process because of the lack of platform we had to work with.
And I think probably what we do is we get some specialists to help us design it next time, so that actually it's the data that's coming out the other end is easy to work with, rather than us struggling with a platform that was designed for one purpose and has been asked to do lots of things. So there's a question about trends in types of themes that were being funded, and whether we could ensure a good spread. Grace, shall I start on that?
Yeah.
So across all of the waves, children and young people was always the place that got most funding, which was interesting actually, because the needs that kept coming up in all of the intelligence, all of the different sources of intelligence, were food and mental health. But I think the fact that, it's partly reflective of the fact that the children and young people's sector is quite large, and there are a number of large children and young people's funders, and also food and mental health affect both affect children and young people. We could see that it was interesting to see that something like mental health, so that came up as, this is the thing that's at the top of everybody's lists. We must make that a separate theme. Actually, as a percentage of the number of funds that went into that, it remained about halfway down the table, I would say. It's worth reflecting that these are fairly blunt themes, so we're asking people which one of these 10 themes fits best the kind of work that you usually do, and then which one of these themes fits best the work that you're applying for. And actually what you see from that is that lots of organizations are, they're this type of organization, but actually what they're doing now is food, or equity, or so people are, we could really see how people were refocusing their work during that time. So
I just add in there as well, that was something we changed in the application form. Originally we were asking just kind of the theme of the organisation, and we realised some people were answering it as organisations, some people were answering it as the project they were asking for. So later on, we kind of split that question in two, so we could get more of an understanding of what wanted funding and from where. And generally, they did fairly match up, but it was the children and young people organisations that were asking for a whole wider spread of themes under their project rather than just their organisation.
Yeah. There's a question that's also come up about, are there drawbacks to categorising applications like this and then allowing funders to filter through them? I think we needed, because of the volume of applications that were coming in, there needed to be some filters for funders to be able to look at, pull out the kinds of things that they wanted. There were so we've talked a little bit about the drawback with the themes that we were asking organisations to identify themselves as. That point about the location, where is the work being delivered? So, do you work at which boroughs do you work in? But we were also asking for a postcode about where the main work would be delivered. Again, both fairly blunt instruments in terms of categorizing. And then the big one for us was around equity, was around how we defined what an equity-led organisation was. So when we started, we added a question about halfway through wave 2 about, is your organisation led by one of these communities? And we looked around at what, how do funders define this? What's the kind of standardised definition? How do you define led by? And actually, there isn't a standard definition, and lots of funders aren't making that kind of assessment. So we settled on 51% of your trustees and senior staff being from that community. So, BAME, LGBT, deaf and disabled, or women. And that was, that was a really blunt way of doing that categorising. And the conversations with the equity partners over subsequent waves were partly about how do you make an assessment about whether that's connected then to the work they do. So lots of organisations in civil society will have a majority of women on their trustee boards or in senior positions, because that's partly the nature of the sector. But that doesn't mean the work that they do is specifically targeted at women. So, over time we were adding in other questions about the makeup of your trustee board and your staff team, the focus of the work that you do, and how you go about doing that work, without wanting to make it really, really complicated, but needing to give funders enough information, enough nuanced information, so that they could make some really sensible decisions about that. And actually, in wave 5, after lots of discussion with the equity partners, we raised the threshold to 75% of trustees and 50% of the whole staff team. So that was, that was interesting for us. Anything else, Grace, on the themes and categories?
I wouldn't say on that one, but I was just looking at Kirsten's question. Do you have any examples where data analysis was used to change grant making decisions, criteria, and inform approval decisions in grant committees? I think one of the things leading on from what Geraldine was talking about equity is that those questions did shape how we sifted our applications for eligibility. We had our partners come and speak to all our sifters, who were all experienced grant managers as well, and make sure they looked at them through an equity lens. So if they'd answered one of these questions, there might be a good reason why they might not have all their trustees listed on the charity commission. So we weren't just declining applications if they didn't have that first criteria. We were understanding there could be reasons behind that, and it was that kind of collecting that equity data that let us do that.
Yeah, I would agree. And another example of so we could see some of the funders. So there was a pooled fund that was led by Citybridge Trust, held by Citybridge Trust, but involving numbers of funders. So, a big chunk of the money was going through that pooled fund. Probably slightly over half the money went through the pooled fund. And they were able to be very nuanced in terms of the kinds of application, partly because they would, they were doing it in bulk. They were doing a lot of it. So in terms of prioritizing the applications that they were going to look at from the portal, so being really clear that they were using that data to look at. So the primary thing was applications that were equity led, under £1 million turnover, and then also being able to think about, well, are there particular boroughs or particular types of work that where we're not getting funding to. An example of that would be domestic violence applications. So for the domestic violence applications, that they waived the priority of only looking at the smaller organisations to look at the lot, because it became clear that there were fewer grants going to that sector, and the same with the homelessness sector. So fewer grants going there, and also we know that some of the most effective organisations are actually the big ones in that theme. So being able to adjust how they were looking for grants to assess in the first place, and then also using the data about what was being funded, what had been funded already, to help them make decisions on the applications they were looking for. So as I was saying, thinking about, well, the outer London boroughs where fewer grants, fewer grants always go to the outer London boroughs. Thinking about particular types of communities within that kind of BAME-led group, other particular communities that this funding isn't reaching yet, and then using that to support their decision making. Grace, we've got a question about the difference between crisis grants and recovery grants.
Yeah, so crisis grants, wave one was just crisis grants. So it was just getting money out through the door really quickly. And then in wave two, I think we all had that moment where we thought everything would be okay quite soon and this wouldn't go on for a year, and started thinking about larger grants towards recovery, and then also realised the crisis was still ongoing. So we ran crisis and recovery grants kind of alongside each other as small and large grants often. And the key differences were kind of the turnaround times, I'd say. The crisis grants we really dedicated to getting back to applicants really quickly, getting their grants to them really quickly, and asking less questions in the application form. But the larger grants was a bit of a meatier application forms, looking more at longer term projects. I think a lot of the data has shown that it was fairly the same on the crisis and recovery grants, but the mental health was showing up really clearly in the crisis grants, particularly as well. I don't know if you have any more on that, Geraldine.
Sorry, I'm scanning through the next questions, Grace. Can't concentrate on two things at once anymore. Shall we move on? Yes, Kat, your question about whether indicators of deprivation were used. So they would definitely have been part of the intelligence gathering in the first place. We spent some time thinking about whether we could overlay on the funder portal the indicators of deprivation with the location of where the applications were coming from. But actually, we that felt that technically that was going to be quite a tricky thing. But the funders that we were working with are all pretty up on that anyway. So, for example, we could see that there are places where we know that deprivation levels are high, like Newham, but we could also see quite quickly that fewer grants were going to Newham, fewer applications were coming from Newham. So we were able to do additional outreach in Newham. We were able to funders were able to focus their attention on Newham in terms of the grants that they were making. So we were doing it like that. And your question, Karen, about fewer grants to the outer London boroughs. I mean, this is something that we our work on constantly with our members have been working on over the last few years. We know that fewer grants go to outer London boroughs. We know that funders get fewer applications from the outer London grants. We know that they're often poorer quality, and we know that there are fewer funders operating in those areas. So, some of the inner London boroughs, somewhere like Southwark, has quite a large number of Southwark-specific funders, who've been there for centuries. Somewhere like Bexley probably doesn't have that kind of the level of place-based funding that the inner London boroughs do. So we have there's another director of collaboration at London Funders who focuses on place, who is doing targeted work at the kind of colder spots around the outside of London. But certainly for the purposes of the London community response, being able to see that in real time, where the grants come from, where the applications come from, what the success rates are for them, and where the money is going, really helped funders to make their yes. Karen, we'll yes, drop us a line afterwards, and we'll send you her details. Fernanda, unincorporated groups. I think what the London community response did in terms of funder practice was not only did it focus funders' minds on the importance of getting funding out to very small organisations, emerging organisations, responding to the kind of mutual aid that we saw explosion during the pandemic, but it also made funders feel bolder about doing it because they were all doing it. So they were able to take risks in a way that they might not have been able to do, that they perhaps don't do in their day-to-day practice. And also, I think the reason funders don't fund unincorporated groups is because the due diligence is a bit difficult, and it's all a bit. But actually, if you're in a situation where you're making faster decisions, and you're allowing yourself to take a few more risks, I think what I hope funders would say is that those risks have paid off. That they haven't seen high levels of grants that they wouldn't feel comfortable making in normal times. So I hope that's one of the things that will stick as we go back to normal.
Yeah, I think some funders will definitely have less fear around it now. They've already done it. And I think also a lot of our funders had their delegated authority changed during the crisis. So it was much quicker to make these decisions, that someone could just decide to go with it and take on that risk instead of it having to go through such a large process of approval like before as well.
And I think one of the other really interesting things was that because funders were, so funders shared their due diligence on organisations. So there was an acceptance that, well, if you've already done your due diligence on that organisation, that means we don't have to redo it. So funders trusting each other, funders getting to know each other and in a much deeper way. So we had a team of up to about 80 volunteers who were working with us on the eligibility checks in theme-based teams, and so there were funders kind of coming into contact with each other who hadn't known each other before, or who hadn't perhaps that level of grant manager hadn't worked actively together before. So the kind of level of trust in each other's decision making, I think, went up. And we also saw that in the pooled fund, that people from all of the pooled funders were involved in doing assessments and involved in doing decision making together. So that sense in which funders are able to act together as a community, I think bodes really well for the future. And the sense in which funders' expectation that there will be data available for them like that to help them make those decisions, I think that's gone up. And I don't think, we've been talking about that, haven't we, for years and years and years, how important it is to use data, but to be able to have kind of be sharing your intelligence in real time with other funders and back with the sector, I think is something that people have appreciated and won't want to stop doing.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting. A lot of the times you go to talks and they look at the data sets and it's from a year and a half ago or a year ago. And because this was so real time, it was a lot more accurate and a bit easier for funders to know the decisions they were making from it were correct, because things hadn't changed that quickly.
And that's probably one of the benefits of the fact that neither Grace or I is a data scientist. So we weren't held back by any of those, oh no, we have to properly clean this data first. we were not saying our data wasn't clean, but we probably did shortcuts, I think, on some of the process. But that's what we've all been doing, isn't it, over the last year, doing stuff as fast as we can. I think one of the other things that change funder practice in the long term is about the engagement of the equity partners and the importance of that kind of intelligence from different sources. So the equity partners, actually in the last wave 5, they actually joined the decision-making panel of the pooled fund with Citybridge Trust. So that, again, that would have been one of those things that funders would have been nervous about, I think, pre-pandemic, that there would be conflicts of interest or it'd be difficult to manage people who weren't, completely independent or whatever. But actually, I think that the intelligence that has brought to those decision-making sessions, those decision-making panels, has just been invaluable. So I suspect we'll see more of that in the future. I think we might be coming to the end of our questions. Has anyone asked anything that we've missed?
I think we've covered all the ones in there. If anyone wants to pop anything else in before we finish.
I think it's worth saying that for London funders, Grace's job title now includes the word data. So for us, it's looking forward. It's thinking about how data is a core part of what we do, and how we'll be able to weave that into all of our engagement with funders. So when funders are talking about wanting to do more in a particular funding cold spot, one of the first things we'll do is look at all the sources of data and make sure they've got that data in front of them. Use that to make decisions.
Yeah, going forward, we'll definitely be incorporating it into kind of our business as usual, rather than before it was maybe an add-on, an afterthought we sometimes thought about.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'm being told by our comms manager to do a little shout out. So if anyone is new to us, please follow us on Twitter at London Funders or on LinkedIn. We're keen to support even more funders. If you fund in London and want to know more about what we're doing, please do get in touch.
And you might also like to know about our Festival of Learning, which is starting on Wednesday this week. Grace and I will be doing another session on data, but there are all sorts of other, this is all the learning that has been generated during the last year by funders, about funders, for funders, and what that means for going forward. So do have a look at any of the sessions coming up. But we'd like to say a huge thank you to the Data for Good organisers for having us today, and for putting on such a great few days of events. We'll be definitely watching lots of the others, and thanks all very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.